we are losing some of the natural integrity of the watersheds by the impacts that are caused by human land uses. So, we have to be careful how much of the forest do we take every year, for example. At what point does it impact the hydrology of an area? And the same goes for all this sediment that is running off. If we have, for example, trails in the wrong locations, and it doesn't really matter whether that is horse use or whether that is ATV use, you want to make sure that those trails are in the right areas, that you don't have a whole bunch of erosion that ends up down in the creeks, because where the creeks are is where the water collects, so they are always the lowest point on the landscape. So that's where all the sediment wants to go. Trout, for example, is an indicator for watershed health because they really require very, very clean and cold water. They depend on all these invertebrates that can only thrive in clean and cold water. So if you have a lot of sediment, you destroy the food source for the fish, and then you also impact the spawning areas for the fish. When you have a loss of fish, what it really tells you is that your water quality is going down the tubes, which isn't in our own interest.
Alberta is rich in natural wonders and wildlife, so it's no surprise that people love to live here. With the expanding population, there is increasing demand to develop our natural resources and to enjoy Alberta's east slopes. Unfortunately, this has come at the cost of widespread and severe reductions in cold water fish populations, and many native species are now at risk. This includes Alberta's provincial fish species, the bull trout. Understanding exactly why native fish populations have declined is difficult. For example, bull trout experts have listed 16 different threats that could be impacting populations. Many of these threats overlap in space and time, so pinpointing the most important ones is very challenging. Recently, Alberta fisheries biologists have developed a tool to understand the cumulative impact of these threats and predict which ones we should focus on to recover bull trout and other native fish species. The key threats predicted by this tool are supported by field data and area knowledge. This new approach will make it possible for the Alberta government and our partners to work together and address the threats that really matter. To further focus our efforts, management actions will be implemented in several focal watersheds across the north and central east slopes. As we learn how to most efficiently recover populations, actions will be taken in even more watersheds. The Alberta government is taking action to protect Alberta's native trout. To learn more about this program,
hello, everybody. I am going to be your host for this evening. Welcome to the 2022 Native Trout Workshop. My name is Shelley Humphries, and I'm just going to check in and make sure that people can see my slides and hear me well.
All good.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So as I said, welcome. My name is Shelley Humphries. I work for Parks Canada, and I am the host for this evening's session. I have to tell you, I'm a little bit nervous based on some occasional technology glitches that I have had in the last year. However, I volunteered because these meetings don't happen without people stepping up. So we've got a pretty long program for this evening, and I'm going to try to stick to my notes to stay on schedule. So I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So this evening, I am joining you guys from Invermere, British Columbia. This is located in the traditional lands of the Tanaka and the Secwepemc people. However, most of you are joining from Southern Alberta. And in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor that we work, live, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all the peoples who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. There are many others also joining us from other traditional territories of First Nations across Alberta. So we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of Treaty 6 and 8 in Alberta, and of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. That long relationship includes both experience and knowledge gained. So before we begin the program, we definitely have a few technical and housekeeping items to cover. This evening, there will be 4 presenters, and after that, there'll be a question period. So we ask that you hold on to your questions to the end. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You are also welcome to leave comments in the chat, but if you do, please be respectful. To ensure that we have enough time this evening to focus on the species, how to identify them, and to start building an awareness of what is being done to recover them, we ask that you keep your questions to the speaker's topic. To change your view, you can go to the top of your screen where it says screen view, and then up there you can make it full screen, so select the full screen option. You can also check the top right hand corner where my floating head might be displayed, and you can adjust where the speaker view is displayed on the screen. Speaker view will allow only the speaker to be displayed, whereas if you switch to gallery view, it allows you to see multiple presenters at once. And our sessions are being recorded, and they will be available to be viewed for those that have registered until the end of March. So if you are unable to make one, or you want to go back and revisit something that maybe you missed, you'll have till the end of March to do that. So I'd like to just give you a quick overview of the 2022 Native Trout Workshop Program. There are going to be 3 evening sessions, followed by a 4th daytime session. So tonight is Life and Times of Native Trout. Next week is From Analysis to Action. On March 8th, it's Steering Trout Towards Recovery. And then on March 15th is a technical daytime session with a bunch of trout biologists and specialists. So a couple more notes about myself. I mentioned that I work for Parks Canada, and I think this is a little bit about how we talk about ourselves, or how people talk about us, or what they think we do. We're here to protect and present these amazing landscapes and the flora and fauna that they contain. We are also here for education, understanding, and enjoyment. We're here for protecting these reserved places for future generations. Maintaining the ecological integrity of these places. And because we're reserving habitat, we have an important role to play for conserving and restoring imperiled species. And I would just like to point out that Yoho, Kootenay, Waterton, Banff, and Jasper all have 1 or 2 threatened fish that are going to be part of the program for the next month. But I'm also optimistic that Parks Canada has an important role to play, partly because of our elevation and our glaciers. We are going to have some of the best cold water available in the province to help preserve and maintain our Athabasca rainbow, our bull trout, and our West Slope cutthroat trout for future generations. And I have been working on cutthroat trout and doing this work since 2005, and I am increasingly optimistic that we are going to succeed. We have put some amazing new tools in our toolboxes. We know what it's going to take to save trout, and I'm going to talk more about this during my presentation on the final day, but these are 31 little West Slope cutthroat trout that we reared and hatched and released into a stream that hadn't seen cutthroat in 50 years. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to be successful. I borrowed this slide from Cows and Fish because I thought it was beautiful. Fish aren't just a product of the water, they are a product of the landscape. This is so true. It isn't just about the tiny stream, the meltwater, the actual water. It's everything that's going on around that water and what's going on in the landscape that is affecting our trout. A lot of people don't think about this. They really just think about protecting the water, but you know, the fish absolutely need the water, but they also need this important riparian habitat. And this picture on the left is a perfect example of showing the riparian zone. And this riparian zone is essential for helping deliver clean, clear, cool, and connected waterways. And native trout need these things, but we do too. So this is going to be an important theme in some of our future talks. Alberta has come together to form the Native Trout Collaborative, and you'll hear more about this later on tonight and in future presentations. But look for these signs when you drive around Alberta because they will help show you where native trout live. So this used to be called the West Slope Cutthroat Trout Workshop. This is year 11, and I have attended almost all of them. I miss the in-person format, but until we can meet again, we have adapted and we have a great program lined up over the next 4 sessions. This is going to give everybody a chance to learn about trout, the threats they face, and how they can get involved in recovery. So tonight, we're going to be learning about the life and times of native trout in Alberta, how to identify them, and some of the threats that they face. We hope by the end of the evening, you will have a greater appreciation for Alberta's native trout and understand some ways you can support recovery. Alberta's native trout are threatened, so knowing the difference between native and introduced species, you can make a difference and is one way you can give trout a hand. And you know, I talk to a lot of people when I'm out working, and in this slide, one of these trout doesn't belong in Western Canada, and one of these trout doesn't even belong in Canada at all. And a lot of people have no idea. They just all think that they're trout. So hopefully we're going to do some work tonight to help people understand about the ones that belong here and why they're in trouble. So here is the overall program for this evening. We are going to start with Amy McLeod from Cows and Fish, and she is going to be presenting on connecting land and water. This will be followed by Elliot Lindsay from Trout Unlimited Canada, and he's going to be featuring a day in the life of a trout. Mike Sullivan from Alberta Environment and Parks will be giving a presentation on angling and trout, recreational, spiritual, and conservation values. And Becky Best-Bertwhistle from Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society will be giving an update on the Alberta Native Trout Collaborative. And there are also going to be a few polls as we run along. So I think that we should start now to do the first poll and get a sense of who is here. So I think that Noreen is going to take over and we're going to do a little poll about the background of the participants that we have with us. Oh, okay. I just saw a little update here. So I've got a little breakdown and I'll let you know just a couple of them because it's kind of interesting. Based on people's self-designation, 41% of the people that are with us tonight are anglers and 23%, the next highest category are non-government conservation organizations. And I think this poll data is available for everybody to see. All right, I'm just going to go back to my PowerPoint. All right. So Amy is our first presenter. Sorry, I don't have this in the right view. Amy is a new acquaintance to me. She is the Provincial Riparian Specialist and the East Slopes Program Coordinator. Amy has been with Cows and Fish for 3 years. She has a Master of Science, is a professional biologist, and has spent her career living and working on watersheds across southern Alberta. When not working, she's usually playing outside, in the woods, mountains, and in or by the water with her daughters. And Amy's presentation is on connecting land and water.
Thank you, Shelley. And I'll just do a check that you can see my presentation.
Yes, I can see your presentation. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks. Thank you for the introduction, Shelley. As Shelley mentioned, my name is Amy McLeod, and I'm here representing Cows and Fish. And the title of my presentation tonight is called Connecting Land and Water. The images presented here are magnifications from 3 different living organisms. And interestingly, at least to me anyways, although they represent very different things, they look similar and are very much related. Do you know what they are? And feel free to take a guess and take a stab at it and put it in the chat box. So these are magnifications of, in the center, a salmonid scale, so a fish scale. On the left, at least my left, a human fingerprint. And then the last is of a tree ring. Trees, fish, and humans are all connected and impact one another. So my presentation tonight will focus on this connection, or in some cases, as you will see, disconnection. Water is connected to plants, fish, and people, and almost everything else. According to the UN, water is at the core of sustainable development. It is critical for social and economic development, healthy ecosystems, and for human survival itself. Water is vital for public health, equality, education, and food security. The physical world of water is closely bound up with the socio-political world, with water often a key factor in managing risks, such as famine and epidemics. And freshwater ecosystems and their associated fisheries provide a multitude of ecosystem services, including supporting human food and energy production, waste disposal and remediation, and transportation and recreation. They also maintain local and regional hydroclimatic regimes, while wetlands in particular provide an immense capacity for water storage and flood mitigation, all of which contributes to climate change resilience. Freshwater ecosystems support extraordinary levels of biodiversity. Covering less than 1% of the Earth's surface, they are home to approximately 1/3 of the vertebrate species and 10% of all species. That makes them some of the most diverse per unit habitat volume on Earth, with more than 140,000 species compressed into just 2% of the world's surface area. However, while freshwater ecosystems and their associated riparian habitats are amongst the most biologically diverse on Earth and have many economic, health, cultural, scientific, and educational values, human impacts to surface and groundwater are dramatically reducing biodiversity and decreasing these critical resources now and for future generations. According to Albert et al., freshwater biodiversity is declining rapidly on every continent and in every major river basin on Earth. And this degradation is occurring more rapidly than in terrestrial ecosystems. For example, globally, wetlands are vanishing 3 times faster than forests. So I ask, how do we change this trajectory and bend the curve? Many threats to freshwater fisheries are external impacts. Currently, about 1/3 of all global freshwater discharges pass through human agricultural, industrial, or urban infrastructure, and less than 1/5 of the world's pre-industrial freshwater wetlands remain, and this proportion is predicted to decline. And we don't have to look very far to see the human land use impacts on our watersheds. And if we use native trout species as an indicator, we see a declining trajectory for watershed health. In the words of Lauren Fitch, my mentor, trouts are the oracles of their watersheds. Their presence, distribution, abundance, and population viability provide both a wise and insightful counsel and a report card on the stewardship of watersheds. These same properties and trends in them are also prophetic predictors of an impoverished future if we do not heed the silent messages of trout. And this slide might look familiar. To support the recovery of fish, we need to broaden our perspective of fish habitat to understand that fish aren't just a product of the water, they're a product of the entire watershed, which includes the land, trees, and us. If we do not engage people in freshwater conservation and management issues, we will continue to see the loss of freshwater habitats, fisheries, and aquatic biodiversity, and ultimately negative impacts to human communities as well. So no matter where you are on the landscape, you are connected to a watershed. And every day your actions send messages rippling downstream. Although we may be land-dwelling animals, we are bodies of water. And the same water that flows through a fish will flow through us. In a time when people may be feeling particularly disconnected and divided, we can look to our water to connect us. Water crosses territorial boundaries and has no political affiliation. Perhaps now more than ever, water is a mirror reflective of our human condition and our relationship to the environment. It is a way for us to look outward and reflect on who we are and the choices we have made. From the headwaters to the tap, our decisions on the land are reflected in the water. If we gaze into the water, which of our choices would that water reflect? And would we like what we see? I mentioned the organization I work for is called Cows and Fish. And some people might wonder why we are called that. For starters, it's easier to say than the Alberta Riparian Habitat Management Society. But beyond that, symbolized by two things that may seem contradictory to one another, Cows and Fish moves past the polarization and recognizes that as all things are connected by water, we need to work together to find solutions that benefit us all. With appropriate management and care, we can have productive and profitable landscapes that don't cause our watersheds to unravel, negatively impacting our finned kin. Riparian areas, those green threads along the water's edge, sew the land and the water together. Cows and Fish empowers people who live, work, and play in Alberta to take actions that care for riparian areas. When we reduce the river to a thin blue line on a map, we reduce our ability to understand a river as a complete system. To restore function in a system, we need to step back from the water's edge and look toward the floodplain. Streams are more than just the channel, and in order to perform all the processes required to support life, they need process space. Riparian areas are the in-between spaces, the transition zone between aquatic and upland environments that are critical in maintaining river processes. The plants are water loving and the soils are saturated longer throughout the year. Riparian areas provide us with a suite of ecological services, such as filtering and buffering water for water quality, infiltrating and storing water for water quantity, and homes for fish and wildlife for biodiversity. The clean, cool, clear water conditions that trout require to survive are in no small part a function of healthy riparian habitat. Overhanging riparian trees and shrubs along our trout streams shelter them from predators, are a source of woody debris to provide in-stream habitat, an important source of fish food. Riparian habitats, as I will explain, are also integral to maintaining water quality and sustaining flows late in the season, another requirement for trout survival. And all those functions listed are because the plants that grow in those areas, they hold it all together, creating habitat and sustenance. And we can tell a lot about the health of a riparian area by what is growing there, and sometimes by what isn't growing there. Plants tell stories about soil and water condition, as well as past disturbances. Sometimes all you have to do is look across a fence line to see the difference. One side will function better than the other when it comes to filtering and trapping sediment to prevent runoff or providing shade and food for aquatic species. We know that native trout require high water quality, but it goes deeper than just surface water quality. The amount of sediment and how long it lingers on and in the stream substrate affects the ability for trout to persist. Sediment entrained in the substrate cements stream gravels together, reduces spaces for aquatic invertebrates, and interferes with the ability of trout to spawn successfully. Healthy riparian areas trap and store sediment to maintain clean, clear water and unsilted loose gravels that provide suitable spawning habitat. Healthy riparian areas with deep binding roots from trees and shrubs and sedges reduce erosion and maintain the stability of our stream banks, acting like living rebar. But unlike rebar, plants have the added benefits, such as filtering water and shade. Riparian trees and shrubs provide sheltered pools where fish can take cover from predators beneath undercut banks, under large boulders, or beneath overhanging cover of in-stream woody debris. They also provide an excellent source of insects for fish to eat. Groundwater discharge is also essential for keeping stream temperatures low. Therefore, you need a watershed that can capture water and slowly release it throughout the year. When our riparian areas are healthy, they act like giant sponges, helping to trap and store moisture below the ground. This moisture can then be released back into the stream or river channel later in the fall. It also helps maintain deep pools and groundwater discharge areas that provide essential overwintering habitat. Alterations to the stream bank and floodplain, such as heavy rutting and mud bogging from ATV use and soil compaction from random camping, vehicle trails, or concentrated livestock use, can affect soil compaction. The long-term impact of soil compaction is the accelerated runoff and loss of groundwater storage and recharge function. In the short term, unnatural sediment loading from eroding trails or cleared landscapes can cause poor water quality, smother and suffocate trout eggs, and compromise important food production areas. In the long term, significant contributions of sediment can become entrained or embedded in the stream bottom, turning loose gravel into cement. These concerns, of course, extend to issues beyond the riparian fringe, as all of our activities on the landscape influence sediment loading and have the potential to alter the dynamics of water storage and groundwater recharge in the watershed. Our choices, our consumption, and our actions leave marks. Ultimately, the success of efforts to protect and improve trout habitat need to be focused at a watershed level and will require the cooperation and collaboration from multiple user groups. Ecologically, succession refers to a directional, predictable change in community structure over time. The trajectory or path that is set is determined by the species present and the events that will either support or suppress their growth. Pioneer species, like willows and balsam poplar, are crucial for setting the trajectory of succession following a disturbance event, such as the rock slide pictured here. So when I see these species sprouting up from old trails, pipelines, and slides, pressing against compressed soils to not only survive, but to thrive, I'm reminded of an opportunity for regrowth and resilience, a chance to choose a path forward and for things to change. This process of succession can be seen in many different systems, including human communities. When we engage in environmental restoration work, we are initiating this process. But when we help inspire curiosity in one another, or enable and support stewardship of others, we become catalysts for change. We are helping set a trajectory of succession rather than contribute to a steep decline. A key principle underlying the success of the Cows and Fish program is that land manager and land user decisions and actions determine watershed health. If people see themselves as active participants within a system or problem, and they understand the dynamics of that system, they may be empowered towards solutions. Moving from awareness, seeing that there is an issue, we know native trout are in trouble, to cultivating ethic, loving fish, and caring enough to want to change it, and then motivating action, doing something about it. The United Nations Decade on Biodiversity from 2011 to 2020 has ended, and we know there is a biodiversity crisis. We are now in the UN Decade of Restoration, preventing, halting, and reversing the degradation of ecosystems worldwide. What are some ways you can take action to reverse the trajectory of degradation and bend the curve? While cumulative land use impacts may seem insurmountable, effective changes may be as simple as putting up a fence and letting nature do the rest. This is an example of a stretch of creek after 8 years of deferred rotational grazing. Soil bioengineering is the use of living plants to perform some engineering function. This approach can create a finished product that treats a problem such as an eroding bank, as well as providing appropriate riparian vegetation. Structural starvation from lack of woody debris and loss of beaver dams is a common issue for stream systems, which in turn drain too quickly, lack connectivity with floodplain as they downcut and become entrenched, have simpler, less complex habitat features. Beaver, our watershed engineers, or beaver mimicry done by humans, can help bring structure back to these systems, slow the flow, increase infiltration, raise the channel, and reconnect floodplains and provide wetland habitat. And if we broaden our definition of restoration to include, among many things, advocacy, giving your voice, education, giving your attention, sweat equity, giving your labor, volunteer efforts, giving your time, and civic responsibility, giving your vote, I am sure you will find a place to cultivate change, making things better for our aquatic kin and for ourselves. Throughout the rest of this series, you will hear from concerned citizens, passionate biologists, and practitioners who are working to help native trout recover. And I'm sure they could use a hand, so I encourage you to reach out. In order to improve conditions for our aquatic kin, we need to reconnect channels and floodplains to allow for process space. We need to reconnect streams and rivers to allow fish movement. And we need to reconnect humans to the landscape so we can understand how our land use impacts the water and each other. It's all about connection. Healthy landscapes, healthy water, healthy humans, healthy fish. Thank you.
Oh, there's my video. Thank you, Amy, for that presentation. And you were right on time, so I didn't have to step in. Our next presenter tonight is Elliot Lindsay, and he's going to be presenting a day in the life of a trout. Elliot is a project biologist with Trout Unlimited Canada since October 2012, when he was hired as a fish rescue technician. He was born and raised in Calgary. Elliot loves fish and water and working with volunteers and stewardship groups to implement habitat rehabilitation projects throughout Western Canada. And outside of work, Elliot enjoys river snorkeling. And I think I was there the first week of Elliot's job as a rescue technician in October 2012. He came to Banff and he helped do some electrofishing up at Hidden Lake. And there was a blizzard in October. Of course there was. And we have some fabulous pictures of Elliot and the rest of the Trout Unlimited crew really getting pelted with snow. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Elliot.
Thanks so much, Shelley. I was thinking about that today before the conference, actually. I wonder if Shelley remembers that. That was basically my first week about 10 years ago. Yeah, that was definitely a memorable electrofishing experience in the snow. Yeah, so thank you so much for the introduction, and happy to be a part of this workshop. I'm assuming that everyone can hear me just fine. And I believe before I begin my presentation, which is actually a video, I think there is a couple of poll questions that are going to appear. So I'm just going to give it a second for those to pop up.
Elliot, we seem to be experiencing some technical difficulty because they're not showing up in the list.
Okay, no worries.
So give us just a second, maybe do a little more intro if you could give us a second.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll just, there's a little intro in my video as well, but I will say that where like a lot of this interest of mine began, aside from working in fisheries, of course, is I think it was the foreword or maybe the introduction of Fishes of Alberta. There was a picture of some guy laying face down in a creek and there was a paragraph about fish watching, and I like laughed out loud, and I thought it was like the goofiest looking thing that you could possibly do. But it sparked an interest, and it just seemed like such a tangible way to, well, if you want to learn more about fish, just look at them. Just stick your head in some water body and watch them. So yeah, that began along, I guess, a decade of crawling around and people looking at you like you're a cadaver floating in the water, whatever it is, wherever you're going. But yeah, hopefully today you'll get a taste of what it looks like, and yeah, be inspired to learn more about our native fish, especially native trout. So yeah, I'm not sure if the polls are still coming, but
unfortunately I can't seem to get them to come up.
No problem.
So yeah, so sorry, Elliot, if you can, we'll try and get them running for the end.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, then I'm just going to share my screen and I will hit play, and just stop me if this is not working. Hello, my name is Elliot and I'm with Trout Unlimited Canada, and today I'm going to try to give you a better idea. Oh, it is frozen. Okay, can you see my screen now?
We can see it.
Yep,
Elliot.
I can see it.
Okay, I will play again. Yeah, of what a day in the life of a native fish is like. You'll have to excuse my cat here who's going to be coming through the frame. But essentially I wanted to give people an idea of what fish are doing during their day. And all the video that you're going to see today was recorded by me just by hand with a little camera like this GoPro here, or the one that's taking the video. And I'd really recommend that anyone who's interested in fish can definitely learn more about their lives, just as I've been able to do. Some basic equipment is just a mask. And if you're wanting to look at native trout, maybe a wetsuit because they like to live places that are very cold, and possibly a pair of flippers because they like to live in really fast water. But essentially, you just really need a mask. So without further ado, let's dive into the world of a native fish. To many people, fish are cold and slimy creatures, lurking beneath the surface of our lakes, streams, and oceans. Glassy-eyed and lacking the cute and charismatic features of the mammals we know and love, they seem to be so separate from us. only at the end of a fishing line, on our dinner plate, or in an aquarium behind glass. We're all familiar with the singing robin, but who knows of the fathead minnow, vocalizing at rival males? Or of the romancing sucker gathering by the hundreds to spawn in tiny streams each spring. Or perhaps more relevant to this workshop, the tireless digging of the spawning trout, hiding her eggs in the safety of streambed gravels. There really is so much to be seen and to be learned from fish, which, by the way, represent about half of all of the vertebrate species on Earth. While each species of fish features special adaptations to overcome their own unique trials and tribulations, for this workshop we're going to focus on our native salmonids, that is, our trout, char, whitefish, and grayling. And to keep things simple, we're often going to just refer to them as native trout. So, what does a day in the life of a native trout look like? Perhaps the best way to understand the life of any species is to understand its needs. Much like ourselves, native trout need food, shelter, a place to raise their young, and, obviously, water. For most people, food and shelter are probably the best known aspects of a fish's life. We imitate the food of our native salmonids and other fish with detailed flies and lures, and we use them for angling. We study a stretch of river with its pools, runs, riffles, woody debris, and other features, and we plan our next cast. The reward for this understanding is often that addictive feeling of a tug on the end of our line and the ensuing fight as we reel in our catch. Each species has its own food preferences and ways of finding that food. Take for instance this pool. Here you can see whitefish feeding on drifting invertebrates and a longnose sucker grazing on algae, using its specialized fleshy lips. Each fish goes about its day utilizing its own unique adaptations to satisfy its needs. Without shelter, you're sure to become food yourself. Much of a fish's day is spent balancing the need to find food and also to remain hidden from predators. Were you able to spot the tiny northern pike hiding near the surface? And it's not just predators that fish have to be aware of. Look at these tiny rainbow trout. They've barely begun their lives, but even they must compete for the best places to stay hidden and to find food. Shelter for them might be the eddy behind a small stone, while for a large bull trout, it could be a deep pool or a rock ledge. Whitefish begin their lives as tiny, shimmering young of year, feeding only on the smallest invertebrates drifting by in the current. They spend their days in the shallow tailouts of pools and runs, somehow mustering enough energy to hold firm in the strong current. As they grow, they can develop a specialized fleshy nose that is perfect for flipping rocks to snatch up stoneflies and other hiding invertebrates. They also develop strong muscles to hold in fast currents where other fish can't, getting first dibs on drifting food. No longer needing to blend in among the gravel, they lose their parr marks and become a beautiful silver. West Slope cutthroat trout and Athabasca rainbow trout begin their lives as small juveniles. Bearing their distinct parr marks and black spotting, they blend in perfectly with stream bed gravels. Too small to venture into deeper water, they hide in the shallow river margins, feeding on small prey items. As they grow, they take up residence in larger pools and runs, no longer afraid of predators like the bull trout or burbot, and use their muscular body and fins to snap up floating and drifting food. They are masterful swimmers and can shift their position effortlessly, using very little energy to do so. Like this Athabasca rainbow trout, who flares out his fins and jaw in a threatening pose toward the camera, all while maintaining a forward position. Bull trout begin their journey in the frigid and unproductive waters of headwater spawning streams. They are perhaps the most cryptic of all the salmonids, with snorkel surveys to document them often being done at night, where they can be spotted with flashlights, having left the safety of their hiding rocks and crevices. During the day, tucked away under stones, their distinct polka dot camouflage helps them stay hidden from sight. As bull trout grow, they develop a large mouth and head, lose their polka dot camouflage, and move out into larger, deeper habitats where they become an apex predator. Bull trout will snap up sick or weak fish and are often lurking under the veil of waterfalls and cascades where they can ambush unsuspecting prey. No longer needing to feed on small drifting food, they can spend most of the daytime sitting on or near the bottom where they need to expend as little energy as possible. One of the common misconceptions about native trout is that because they can be easy to catch, they're not very smart. But imagine how much energy you need to live somewhere like this. You can't just let food pass you by, especially when you have energy-intensive needs like spawning just on the horizon. Spawning takes place generally in the spring and in the fall. Athabasca rainbow trout, Arctic grayling, and West Slope cutthroat trout spawn during the springtime, while bull trout, mountain whitefish, and lake trout spawn in the fall. The eggs of fall spawning species develop slowly in the cool water over the course of months, and they hatch out in the early spring, while the eggs of spring spawners grow much faster in the warmer water, hatching out in spring or summer. The timing of all of these species ensures that newly hatched young can grow during the summer months when food is abundant and there's enough water to move throughout their habitat. Spawning female trout use their muscular bodies and tails to dig depressions in the stream bed. These nests are called redds. They deposit their eggs here, which are simultaneously fertilized by the male, and then move slightly upstream to sweep more gravels on top of these fertilized eggs. The small eggs will stay nestled in the gravel for weeks to months, depending on the species and the water temperature. Whitefish and grayling are broadcast spawners and distribute their eggs over cobbles and gravels, where they settle among the cracks to be hidden away. Once the young hatch, it's time to begin their escape and start their life outside their gravel nurseries. With the clock ticking and having resorbed most or all of the nutrition provided to them by their eggs and yolk, food and shelter become critically important. And so begins another day in the life of a fish. Well, we've covered a lot, and yet there's still so much left unknown. What does a day in the life of a fish really look like? Well, I guess the short answer is it depends. Depends on the fish, but more than that, it depends on where that fish is in its life. The day of a bull trout might be spent skulking the blue depths of a deep and dark pool, while a growing whitefish might spend the day with its school, flipping rocks in search of food. A sucker might spend the day grazing in the sun. Newly hatched fish seem at home in mere inches of water where someday they'll never fit. Schools of spawning dace swim beneath the lily pads in lakes far too warm for our native trout to survive in. So can we ever really know what a day in the life of a fish is like? Well, we can try. I encourage you all to take a dive, or perhaps a crawl, into the lives of fish and see for yourself the amazing things that they're doing beneath the water's surface. Then you'll see and know these fish for what they are, amazing and complicated animals. It's important to speak up for their protection because they can't speak for themselves. And now more than ever, especially in the case of our native trout, they need all the help they can get. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Elliot. I really loved some of those images. I don't think I've ever seen pictures of the eggs like that before. Are we able to launch Elliot's poll? Or does it make sense now? I think there was supposed to be a before and an after.
Yeah, I think there's still maybe worthwhile. Here we go.
Oh, I see it.
And hopefully the video came through okay. My computer is like, it sounds like a airplane like trying to take off at the airport, and it's like 500 degrees. So it was struggling. I think I posted it like as an unlisted YouTube video, so I think we'll probably make it available through like our Trout Unlimited Canada YouTube page. So yeah, just in case.
All right, it looks like the poll is done, except it disappeared from my screen already. Oh, there it is. Elliot, this looks great. I think you might have inspired some people to like put some dry suit on and go crawl around on their bellies, snorkeling to get that perspective, because 59% of people said they might do some fish watching this upcoming summer.
Well, that's great news. Hopefully I'll see some of you out there.
That's excellent. Was that the only question or was there one more?
I think there was, the other ones were before, so I think that's probably it. Yeah.
Somebody in the chat asked whether you need a wetsuit or a dry suit. And you know what? You could go with either. The dry suit is nicer when the water is very cold. And the wetsuit can be a little bit chilly. We use dry suits. Do you use both, Elliot?
I usually use a wetsuit, but it just kind of depends on where. Sometimes you don't need anything, but usually for native trout, you will want at least a wetsuit because they like it cold.
Yeah, they sure do. I'm going to take us on to our next presenter. So Dr. Mike Sullivan continues to nurture a lifelong love affair with Canada's wild places, especially in Alberta's mountains and the north. He is paid by the Alberta provincial government as their fisheries scientist in the Fish and Wildlife Division, but doesn't let that stop him from enjoying the lessons offered by the study of wild lands and the furry and finny residents that live there. His preferred habitat is a snow cave overlooking some lonely valley, but as an adjunct professor, he's usually found near the University of Alberta campus, where he's lucky enough to earn a living and guide graduate students to finding ways to make peace between fishermen, developers, and fishes. And I just have to offer a personal note. One thing that I've really found about fisheries is that the fisheries biologists are extraordinarily generous with their time. And when I was just new with Parks Canada, Andy Paul, who had just finished grad school, was the first person that ever took me out backpack electrofishing. My background had been reproductive endocrinology. And Mike Sullivan was the first person to take me out boat shocking. We continued to share and exchange. And the most recent lesson Mike laid down for us was teaching my team how to strip down an engine that had been flown improperly in a helicopter, and the oil had spilled out into all the wrong spots, and we really needed it to work. And at the side of the lake, he took that engine apart and he cleaned it all up and he made it go. So Mike Sullivan is going to take over the floor. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shelley. I'll just get things going here. Yep. And let's get this out of here. And how is that working?
That looks good.
Okay, do we have do I have a bar up at the top that you can't see my words?
Yeah, it says you're viewing Mike Sullivan's screen, but it's only that very top part that is cut off, but all the rest of it is showing.
Okay, so how do I get rid of that little bar, I wonder?
I think you're actually good, Mike.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it's the slide that's cut off. It's the view is okay.
Okay,
Yep.
Very good. Yeah, so why why and how do we restore our trout? This is a fascinating question, and the pictures on the screen are really about the trout I'm going to talk about tonight. This is the what they call in Cree the Nemakosis. That's up in the lands of the Assiniboine Winniwak, the Rocky Mountain Cree up by Jasper. The Nemakosis is the little stream trout. And to that end, I just want to show our respect and acknowledge where we are. Tawao Nitotem, which means welcome, my friends. I'm speaking to you today from just upstream of Edmonton on what's called Amiskwachi Waskahegan, Amisk Beaver Wachi Hills Waskahegan House, Beaver Hills House. That's the old name for Edmonton. This is Treaty 6 territory. I'm on the territory of the Papachase Nation, Papachase, the Woodpecker people. I'm also on the territory of the Muskogosic people, probably the Magic Land people, and homeland of the Métis Nation. Much of tonight's talk will be bringing in a lot of Indigenous wisdom and basically trying to link, can we use elders' wisdom to solve the problems and integrate cumulative effects modeling in this Indigenous wisdom? And just a few words about cultural appropriation. I am not Cree. I grew up on the Peter Ballantine Cree Nation reserves in North Saskatchewan. I have Cree cousins. My father and uncle were taken and had that bad time. But I've hunted, trapped, fished, lived with those wonderful people, the Cree peoples, for many years. And we share a worldview, as do many of the people on this call. That worldview is a deep respect for nature and a deep respect for our place in it. And I've taught my children this. And I'm going to teach you a lot about lessons about fish from our family's travels. My son and daughter learned much of the values and the worldview from their grandparents. from me and from traveling in the wilderness. My daughter especially really took to that. I'm proud to say Dr. Candidate Sierra Sullivan actually working on her PhD on restoring native Athabasca rainbow trout and its genetics. We traveled a ton in the last decade through the beautiful landscapes of Wilmore, Jasper, Northern Banff. Here's Sierra at the Athabasca River headwaters, where the Athabasca actually comes out of the gravel near the black hole near Hobble Creek. She's also traveled all the way down the Athabasca to the Big Lake, to Lake Athabasca. Probably not a lot of people have traveled the entire length of the Athabasca River. We've seen some amazing things, and some of the amazing things we've seen are fish. In so many of these places, we could drop a fly, a lure, and catch fish. We could see fish. If you just look at this photograph, we could look in these creeks and go, there's a bull trout, there's a bull trout, there's a bull trout. It was amazing in the backcountry to see the size of these, like these two big bull trout here, and the abundance of the fish. When she was working for Shelley Humphries in Parks Canada, we traveled up in the House River and actually found a new lake that had lake trout and bull trout in it. Beautiful, abundant, large fish. And those are real strong lessons that our remote travels have taught us. You know, that these bulls, rainbows, lake trouts are often abundant, often large, often easy to see. And those stories you hear from long ago are still true in the backcountry, which is just a stark contrast to today's foothill streams. You know, prior to 2000, it just seems like those tales you heard about bull trout were fantasy. Like bull trout used to be the most common char, biggest stream trout in Alberta. You know, you'd find it in the Raven, Cardinal River. That picture of the guy smoking the pipe is bull trout in the city of Red Deer. We had them in the city of Edmonton and down at Fort Saskatchewan. They were abundant and widespread. And by 2012, they were nationally listed as a species at risk. We failed to understand and even prevent the declines, not just decline to threatened or endangered, but in some places, like when we electrofished the Bow River near Canmore, we found no bull trout in the entire reach, a possible local functional extirpation. And it's more than just bull trout. This is the Athabasca rainbow, gorgeous fish. This is R.B. Miller, one of the first biologists at University of Alberta, in his studies in the Hinton-Edson area in the late 1940s. He described rainbow trout as being present in incredible numbers in the larger tributaries and in the river. And by 2014, they were endangered, federally listed. We went from incredible abundance to endangered while we studied it, while we watched. My daughter on the left there and her colleagues, the other grad students, they only know Alberta trout as endangered species, be it a bull, a West Slope cut, or a rainbow. They don't know it as a stream fish that you'd go and catch by fly fishing. To them, native fish are endangered species. And we can blame it on these things. You know, no, it's habitat. No, it's hybridization and invasive species. No, it's harvest. You know, and we have strong voices, oddly enough, promoting each threat as a benefit. I've heard foresters say, well, if you take the trees out, the water will warm up. And the biggest problem with Athabasca rainbows is the water's too cold. They'll grow better. And to a degree, that's true. And the biggest problem is you know, we got to stock other species so that we diffuse the fishing pressure. And I've heard, you know, other anglers tell us, no, you got to harvest them. If you don't use them, you'll lose them. You know, and each person is rationalizing their worldview as right. And they blame the other. This is just a pointing fingers because all my friends agree that, well, you know, if you don't harvest them, if you don't use them, you'll lose them. And for 50 years, we've just argued and we don't solve the problem. The fisheries keep declining. We can look at this fish and try to understand it's our worldview that puts that fish in its box. And the thing about worldviews is you don't even know that it's your worldview. You just think that everyone else has these values. Everyone else thinks you should catch and release cutthroat, or they're just wrong, right? So if you're in an argument or a meeting or you're talking with friends and you hear the words, it is habitat or it is overharvest, try to understand that that's a worldview. There is no it. There is no one thing that we can blame all fish decline on. That's a biased, value-laden worldview. You know, basically, if you say it is habitat, or it is hybridization, or it is overharvest, you put yourself in a box, and you've said all other boxes are wrong. So when I grew up, you know, up in the Pelican Narrows area, and my friends would listen to, in the evening, we'd listen to the elders, we'd listen to the stories, and a little Cree boy growing up listens to this incredibly rich set of tales, that all the animals have these incredibly rich lives. You'd learn about, you know, the bear, this painting in the lower left corner there, the muskwa. The key thing you'd learn about them is the biggest and most powerful aren't the most important. The muskwa, the bear, he has a turtle amulet, a mikinak. He learns from a kinak because the turtle is so powerful. And he listens to a pisikakakis, the magpie, because the magpie is giving the bear advice. And in the creation stories, it wasn't of the animals that went down to get the mud from the bottom to create the earth. It wasn't otter, you know, one of the bravest predators, and it wasn't beaver, the strongest. It was the tiny little muskrat that went down to the bottom and got the little handful of mud to put on Turtle's back and created Turtle Island, where we all live. The Cree kids, my friends and I, we learned that nature is rich and all creatures have value, and humans aren't the top of the food chain. And critically, we also learned that no creature is all good or all bad. There's a great story from the Blackfoot Confederacy about wolves and people. And the story goes that the people were having real trouble catching bison. The people didn't know how to work together. And the wolves, who could work as a team and catch bison, went and taught the people, well, here's how to work as a team. You must learn teamwork. You must learn how to work as a group to catch these bison. And this teaches us that humans aren't at the top of the food chain, that wolves have good things and bad points. And it's a beautiful story. It teaches us that the Milky Way, the Wolf Trail, reminds us of the lesson that the wolves taught us, how we can live together. And to a Cree person, in Indigenous knowledge, bull trout aren't any better than sculpins. Sculpins have rich personalities. Bull trout have rich values. If you were to tell a Cree person, well, we're only going to work on bull trout because suckers don't really matter, they just don't understand that worldview. They'd nod politely and go along with it, but that just sounds weird to them. In the Nihilwak worldview, things are a package deal. There are good parts and there are bad parts. There's one important story. I was at a conference with a bunch of other Cree folks, and the speaker was at the front, and there was a tall, handsome Cree gentleman, and he was going on about treaty rights, and he was just so eloquent. And when he finished, I turned to the two ladies I was with, and I said, "My goodness, what a great man. That was a wonderful, wonderful teaching that he told us." And the one Cree lady turned to the other Cree lady and said, "Oh yeah, remember when he got drunk and we had to grab his children and he was trying to beat them, and we had to jump in the car and lock the doors, and he's smashing on the windows." And I was just shocked at this. And I said, "Oh my God, Dale's a jerk." And the lady turned to me and said, "Oh, Michael, you've lived with us for so long and you're still thinking like a white man. Dale is a package deal. Dale is Dale. He has his good parts and he has his bad parts. You white people want to put everything in a box and say it's good or bad, it's useful or it's useless." That's a powerful lesson. Things are a package deal. Bring that to fish. Forestry is not all bad, nor is it all good. Harvest is not all bad, nor is it all good. Exotic fish are not all bad, and they're not all good. We have to start acknowledging this richness of the things. One of the elders I talked to quite a bit made this gorgeous painting. Whose dream is this? Is the salmon dreaming of the bear, or is the grizzly dreaming of the salmon? Terry tells me that's more of a white person's view. an Indigenous person would see the salmon becomes the bear, and the bear becomes the water droplets. And it is one thing, it is one system, it is one big part. And Western scientists would look at this and go, okay, well, we have the salmon biologists, and we have a wealth of knowledge about the salmon, and we have the bear biologists, and we have a wealth of knowledge about the bears, and we have the limnologists and the water users, and we have a wealth of knowledge about the water. We have a great track record as Western scientists. We know so much about what selenium does to fish embryos, and what sediment does to fish eggs, and what gas bubble trauma does to migrating smolts, and what overfishing does to adult fish. We have so much knowledge, and we can't keep salmon in the Fraser River. We can't put it together. We have knowledge, but we don't have the wisdom to keep salmon in the Fraser River. Look at us. We can make the best vaccine ever, but we don't have the wisdom to get people to take it. And that's a huge difference. Knowledge and wisdom. Great quote. Knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put them in a fruit salad, right? So white people, Western scientists have great knowledge, but we don't have the wisdom to put all those little pieces together to solve the problem. There's a great example on the, a few years ago, we had a project called the NCNT, North Central Native Trout, where we had a bunch of watersheds, and we were going to, we're going to do a big experiment across Alberta. We're going to take 4 watersheds, and we're going to close angling, and another 4, we're going to close angling and do habitat work. And another 4, we're just going to do habitat work. And another 4, we're going to do these big experiments. And we put that out as a nice big experiment across the province to learn about what levers you can push to really make a difference. And the anglers went ballistic. It made the national news, right? Anglers feel stream closures are coming. The Alberta Fish and Game, can't support the direction. It only applies to anglers. And they wanted to point at the other players. And it even made it into a textbook on biodiversity conservation. Once the issue became politicized, the minister balked and stopped the process, stating she wasn't convinced the science was strong enough. Well, of course the science wasn't strong enough. It was an experiment, even though trade-offs were the issue and not the science. The stakeholders opposed the decision because it conflicted with their worldview. And we see this, Alberta fish stocks take a dive. And is it because of culverts or silt or exotic species? Or pointing fingers is the thinking that got us into this problem, and it won't be the thinking to get us out of it. And perhaps it's the Indigenous elders' worldview is a way to get away from the problem of pointing fingers and say, it isn't me, it's them, right? As Terry described it to me, we're part of creation. Our respect for the natural world is the key to understanding. We're putting really neat programs together to try to determine what is the effect of many things we value on the big thing we value. In that sense, we're trying to integrate Western science knowledge into the wisdom that the elders teach us of how the natural world works. You can look at this photograph of me up in northern Jasper, and you can say things are not all good. I mean, there's silt behind me. But they're not all bad. Silt is necessary for the bugs, and there's no trees along the creek, but that's not all bad. You have to understand the world as a package deal. When Lauren Fitch started this, he didn't call it cows versus fish. He didn't call it cows or fish. He called it cows and fish. We have to understand the world as a package deal. So what we do with our model that was talked about in the introduction, we're finding each good or bad thing that might threaten the fish community. And we're bringing in all threats, any threats. We don't have any favorites. We're trying to do it dispassionately and understanding the good with the bad. So in this graph here, you can see that, hey, temperature, it's too cold for Athabasca rainbows and there's not many. It's just right and there's lots, and it's too warm and there's not many. And lots of mortality, there's none. But a little bit of mortality, there's a fair number. And lots of brook trout, there's none. But a little bit of brook trout is okay. And lots of phosphate, the water's too green and there's no fish. But a little bit of phosphate is actually pretty good. You have to understand the good with the bad. You have to be dispassionate, taking the anger, taking the it's not us, it's them out of it. So in this modeling, we're integrating usually 15 or 20, 25 dose response curves. This is a way to take the elders' worldview of little bits of Western science and putting it together into a status of one fish, right? And we get these curves from public meetings, from field studies. There's Shelley measuring DNA, taking DNA samples from one of the cutthroats. We get it from literature reviews, and we end up with something that looks like this. This is the model for the Erith and Barrett watershed and the status of Athabasca rainbows. And we can see what matters and likely what doesn't matter. Okay, in this situation, yeah, angling has brought them down, and sediment has brought them down, and culverts have brought them down, and non-native trout have brought them down. But it wasn't whirling disease, it wasn't selenium, it wasn't dams. We had 20 threats, but 4 really matter. And if we got rid of all the native trout, we wouldn't have brought them back. If we got rid of all the angling, we wouldn't have brought them back. We have to work on 4 things, right? This is really solid science. We did a big Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat review back in 2018. It's like a PhD defense from hell. But the Federal Science Review recommended this process, cumulative effects process, as could be useful for everything from belugas to sharks to bull trout to humpbacks. This has gotten some solid science, and we're really focusing the modeling work right now at 2 universities in BC, Simon Fraser and UBC, and bringing in a lot more of the Indigenous wisdom. So why?
Mike,
why should we even want? Yep.
You have 1 minute left.
Yep.
Sorry to cut you off.
No problem. Hey, it's the law. We have over 40 policies, agreements that we commit to protecting our biodiversity. Biodiversity is all the creatures that are in the stream. The other thing is, man, you can go anywhere else on the planet and only find these fish here. That's pretty special. And I often like to say, these are so special. You get in Alberta in one of those beautiful autumn scenes where the ice is freezing on the pails in the morning, and you look down and you see the deep pools with the bull trout and the rainbow trouts in them. I got friends who climb around the planet, and they say nowhere else is as perfect as a Foothills autumn, but without fishes that picture as a hole torn in it. So I just want to leave you with this powerful message that the elders taught me. We would sit there and listen to these winter stories in Cree, and many of the stories were about all the animals, and one of the animals in particular, the kakwa, the porcupine. The lesson that the elders taught us was kakwa pasapatam yakatu. And what that means is, when you meet a porcupine in the forest, he'll turn around and he'll try to spine you. He'll walk backwards. I mean, he's trying to spine you, but the elders tell us, Michael, he's looking back. He's looking in his past, but he's moving forward. That means he's recognizing his mistakes, but he's moving forward. He's looking where he went wrong, but he's always moving forward. And that's a powerful message for us all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, Mike. That was a very provocative and interesting presentation. I can't wait to join a discussion about it at the end. So we're going to move on to our final presentation for the evening. This is Becky Best-Bertwhistle, and she's going to be talking about the Alberta Native Trout Collaborative Update. Becky was raised all over the hills of Essenwachi. You're going to have to help me if I did that wrong. The Rocky Mountains of Alberta. She has studied politics and community organizing at the University of Alberta, and she continues to learn every day from the passionate grassroots conservationists she is fortunate to work with. When not on the job, she can be found playing bluegrass on the various stringed instruments and spending time hiking, riding, or paddling around the province. And I haven't had the opportunity to work with Becky yet, so I don't have any anecdotes yet, but I hope that maybe one day we'll get to go outside and make one together. Over to you, Becky.
Thanks, Shelley. Don't worry about being anecdoteless, if that's a word. Yeah, and Mike already shouted out the area that I'm from, the Rocky Mountains of Northern Alberta. I grew up in between Hinton and Jasper. I guess I didn't know it at the time, but I was fish watching all those little trout when I was a kid. My favorite hobby was just like Elliot described, laying in a creek with goggles on, staring at trout. So I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. Anyways, hi everybody. My name is Becky Best-Bertwhistle. I'm the program coordinator at CPAWS Southern Alberta. And I'm going to be giving a quick update about the Native Trout Collaborative and specifically the communications work that we've been doing. So before I get started on that, I just want to shout out the partners who have been working on this. So Cows and Fish, Alberta Conservation Association, Trout Unlimited, AEP, FRI, and this work is funded by Department of Fisheries and Oceans. The Native Trout Recovery Program is, as you saw, they had a video in the opening reel before the session started tonight. It's a comprehensive long-term fish conservation initiative aimed at addressing and recovering populations of native trout in the watersheds of the eastern slopes. As others have described tonight, this project implements cumulative effects modeling to best understand where management decisions will have the biggest impact. The communications work collaborative of this project was born out of the understanding that people in the landscape need to know about native trout and their habitats and threats to their recovery for the on-the-ground work to be successful. So my presentation tonight is going to be focused on that communications work we're doing so that people who are recreating on the eastern slopes, people who are fishing, taking part in any activities in native trout habitat, understand native trout, understand their habitat, and understand how their personal actions can impact that. So for the last few years, we've been developing a communication strategy to better reach Albertans, to tell them about native trout and to motivate them to change their personal behaviors. This strategy has been supported by in-depth background research, audience surveys, and focus groups. Some of the focus groups were held at the last in-person native trout workshop at the beginning of 2020. Our aim is to create communications materials that were really targeted and relevant to our established audiences. We pursued a number of different activities to get our messaging across. Here's some of the activities we've been pursuing. Before we started delivering information though, and creating materials, printing, building a website, all of this stuff, we wanted to have a better understanding of what the public knows about native trout. And detailed research on the topic of public literacy as it relates to these species is something that hasn't been done. And I wanted to share, I know there's a lot of folks on tonight who are anglers, there's a lot of folks on who are part of nonprofit organizations doing this work, and I think it's important for us to all understand together what the general public knows about this topic. So some of the important lessons from the survey work is what I'm going to be sharing next. Our survey that we did had over 3,000 total respondents, and we have sorted those respondents into user groups. Recreational user groups mainly, so OHVers, anglers, hiking, camping, etc. The results I'm going to highlight are those groups likely to have the biggest impact on trout and habitat through their activities. And what we learned is there's a major dearth of knowledge when it comes to even the simplest concepts related to native trout, like which species are actually native to Alberta. So we found that 78% of respondents claimed to be able to identify native trout, while only 9.4% of those who then we followed up with were able to identify all three. And of those who identified all three, only 6% identified only native trout. So the others were including non-native trout in their answer. We found that this knowledge gap was consistent across all user groups. So you can see we have anglers, OHVers, and activators, which I'll explain more what that is. As you can see, the anglers still have a long way to go towards closing the knowledge gap between perceived and actual knowledge. These findings illustrate the need for species ID training and education on what makes Alberta native trout special to this land group, user group, which is already really passionate about fish in general. The activators, this group, while they don't spend the most time on the landscape, is the biggest audience. It's the most people. So these are folks who live in the cities, urban areas, but they might get out to the eastern slopes a few times a year, and they're really passionate about conservation and environmental issues. And you can see their knowledge is low as well. We wanted to also understand what the public considers to be the biggest threats to the recovery of native trout. So this is kind of what Mike was already talking about with that finger pointing. What does the public today think is the biggest issue? When surveyed, angling pressures were identified by all user groups as the largest threat facing Alberta's native trout. This could be because of the visibility of anglers and their relationship with native trout. 35% of respondents only reported one threat against native trout, showing that approximately 1/3 of all respondents are unaware of cumulative impacts of all land use activities. So out of the total over 3,000 total responses, only 5 people directly mentioned cumulative effects as a threat. And those that mentioned multiple threats did not mention the ways in which different threats are interconnected. So again, we have a major knowledge gap when it comes to the interconnectedness of all the threats facing trout, some of which Mike outlined just before me here. We also wanted to understand what messages were motivating folks to change behavior. The most motivating key messages across all audience groups was relating to clear, clean, and cool water. This shows the connection between people's needs for clean, clear, cool water and that of Alberta's native trout, building empathy and relation between land use groups and Alberta's native trout. Across all land users, the top 3 motivators for changing their behavior to protect trout would be continued enjoyment, preserving the resource, access habitats, preserving the species for future generations, and protecting the environment and ecosystem and habitats. Using this information and other pieces of background work, we've been moving forward and developing a communication strategy and audience profiles. And now that we understand, what people know and what they don't know about trout, we've been pulling together all this information and finding creative ways to deliver it. After a lot of work, we were really happy to launch our information hub at the beginning of February, which can be found at albertanativetrout.com. Maybe if Logan, if you could drop that in the chat for me, that'd be fantastic. The link to that. On this site, users can find interactive fish ID tool that shows the 3 native trout species, how to identify them, their recovery status level and habitat range. We have another interactive tool about what healthy native trout habitat can look like, both above water and below water. We have a third interactive tool that explores what personal actions Albertans can take to support the recovery of native trout in all the different land use categories. The site also explores the concept of cumulative impacts and has a section where we highlight important trout recovery work happening outside of the collaborative by other organizations across the province. The project has been really well received so far on social media, and we're currently rolling out a number of different outreach strategies to drive visitation to the website and also just establish that sense of provincial pride in Alberta native trout species, again, which Mike touched on before me as well. We have printed stickers, we're putting out print ads, we're doing angling specific outreach. We have this outreach booth. We have 3 different outreach kits that will be hopefully hitting up in-person events in the near future and talking to folks about native trout in person. And this is where we could use your help. We want to continue this work over the next few years and hopefully continue to grow our scope and reach, and also to increase the level of trout literacy in specific user groups and the general public. So because we're just at the beginning stages of public outreach of this project, we'd love your input about who we should be talking to and how and where we should be doing it. So I don't know, Noreen, if we have the access to the polls now, but we had a couple of poll questions. And if the polls don't work, that's okay. We would just be really interested to hear from all you folks online tonight about, who you think we should be talking to more, who most needs to hear this information, and what are good ways to reach them, things that we might not have thought. We'd be really interested to hear what you have to say. I don't know, are those polls working, anybody?
I think Logan is going to launch them.
Okay. I'll give it a second. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so you can choose more than one response here.
And just a reminder to scroll down so you can, because there is more than one question.
Yeah, and if you have something that doesn't fit into this multiple choice box, please feel free to drop it in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll make note of that. Hopefully everybody has had a chance to answer. We can close that and move on to the next slide. It's still on my screen. Oh, there we go. Great, thank you. So to wrap up, I'm going to give away some of the products we've been making. So I have a bunch of trout stickers. We produce these really great, I'm showing it to my camera right now. We produce these really great stickers that actually show the AP illustrations of native trout that people can put on their gear. We have some fun Alberta shaped ones as well. So if you would like some stickers, I added a skill testing element, not really to this giveaway, but please check out our website at albertanativetrout.com. You email me the name of one of the 3 stories of native trout that we featured on the bottom of the website and your mailing address, and I will send you a sticker package so you can represent your pride in native trout. This is a great poll answer, thank you. But yeah, and my email is on the bottom there, and I will also drop it in the chat in case you missed it. But that's everything from me, and I'll pass it back to the host.
Thanks for that presentation, and I definitely want some of those stickers. They're wonderful. That's great. I'm just going to go back to my own screen for wrapping up the evening. Let's see, is it coming? No, the right screen did not share. Try again. Let's see if that worked. Okay, I think hopefully that's working. I hope you're looking at a bull trout. So that is it for the formal part of our evening. We just have a couple things to wrap up. We are going to have 30 minutes for questions. But before that, I want to conduct one final poll if our poll is working. And then we just like to take a couple minutes to acknowledge some of the people that are involved behind the scenes. So if possible, are you guys able to launch the final poll? Excellent, thank you. I see it's coming. I thought I would be able to see the answers as they were coming in, but I must be doing something wrong. I can just see the static poll in front of me.
Shelley, just unscreen share.
Okay, thank you. Did that work? Excellent. Is everybody just about done? Are you able to see that, Noreen?
Looks like if people could wrap up in the next few seconds, almost everybody so far. So there's 2 questions, so it's probably taking just a little bit longer. Can you see it at all, Shelley? Do you need us to do the end?
It hasn't popped up yet. Before it has been coming up, but there's been a big delay. Oh, there it is. I got it. Okay. So I hope everybody else can see this too, but if not, the first question, did you learn something new today? And 100% of respondents said they definitely learned something new. So that's exciting. And then the second question, will this workshop impact the way you interact with native trout and their habitat? And 79% of people answered yes. 17% answered maybe, and 4% answered no. So thank you for these polls and people's responses. I just think I have one more slide to share. Hopefully it's coming. So first, I would like to thank everybody that joined us. I think at one point this evening, we had at least 115 people that had joined in on a cold night in Alberta and British Columbia. And we really appreciate people joining us. I've always got a lot of value out of this workshop, and I feel like it's always allowed me to talk to some people that maybe we don't reach at some of our different planning initiatives inside the park. And then I think it's really essential to recognize that these things don't happen without money. And this project, the Trout Collaborative, and the things that are going on with cows and fish wouldn't happen, and Trout Unlimited, without support. So Environment Canada and Fisheries and Oceans provide support, as well as the Government of Alberta and the Alberta Conservation Association. So that is the formal presentation part of our evening. I'm just going to stop sharing, and then we have an opportunity to answer, have some questions or discussion. I think I'm going to take this first one here, if you guys don't mind. We've had a couple of different questions that have come up about really specific land use things that are going on in the province of Alberta. And obviously, I don't work for the province of Alberta, and I have to be super careful. But I think everybody has seen through the pandemic, I'm just going to make a little parallel construction, that the ministers of health, the biologists, we get to make recommendations. We get to go collect the data and do the work, but we are not always the decision makers, almost never actually. So tonight you've got a panel and none of us are the regulators. So we aren't really directly involved in the decisions that are being made. I don't remember who mentioned it, but earlier tonight somebody did. If people are unhappy with some of these specific decisions, we're not the right people to talk to necessarily about it. But CPAWS has a role here. And then you need to get in touch with the regulatory side of the provincial government. And in some cases, this might be something that you need to take up with your MLA or your environmental minister. It's just not the role that I play for Parks Canada, for example. I can gather data and make recommendations, but the decisions are often political decisions that are made. So I'm sure that that is a frustrating answer to Colin. And I think he had a couple questions about this, but that is our answer for you. And I see a few people are posting some things in the chat. I think that there are some groups, I know there are some groups, even in my own social media feed, that are very actively trying to get information about these things and have their voices heard. So hopefully that question is good. A little reminder for the panelists to put their videos on. And I'm going to have a look at, I'm going through this here. We have a question from Sherry. And I think this is kind of more of a discussion question. Sherry's wondering, how do we advocate for fish species at risk? And to be successful, we need more than a Species at Risk Act and the Trout Collective. And what are other things that are needed? So I'm wondering if anybody on our panel wants to take on that question.
I'll take the first stab at it. But I definitely think this speaks to a lot of what Michael presented on. And I think it stems from the starting point is a shift in worldview. I think how we relate to our natural world in some ways is limited, especially if we don't have much exposure to it. And I think, you know, we can have all the graphs and the charts and the data available, but if people aren't willing to connect with all the other living kin around them, and they're not willing to acknowledge the responsibility that they have to the natural world, then I think we aren't really going to get anywhere. And that's not to say that the science isn't valid. I mean, I'm a scientist myself, but I do believe it starts with the heart.
I'll throw in my 25 cents worth too there, Amy. to add to that, if I was to pick someone in the audience and say, what can they do? We hear from the vocal minority always. We just came off 3 weeks of seeing thousands of people protesting when there are millions of people, tens of millions of people that have a different worldview. If you out there tonight are passionate about something, speak up, be vocal about it. It's just human nature to be vocal when you're angry, but not vocal when you say, these guys are doing good. And it's amazing how few letters, emails, calls to MLAs and ministers make a difference. Generally, 5 phone calls is a landslide. If you guys are passionate about these things and you see, hey, this is a good thing we should do. Bull trout need help. Do this thing. Don't just call your MLA or your government or your biologist to be angry. Say, why are you doing this thing? And if you agree with it, give us some love. Say, I agree with it. The bull trout need hugs as much as anger, which is what we tend to see. You have a powerful voice, way more powerful than most people understand in the political system. Do good with it. You don't have to be angry all the time. Do good with your voice.
Does anybody else want to tackle that, or should we move on? Okay, I got another question here. So this is from Dawn. Anglers and others who have listened to and watched these wonderful presentations will all have favorite streams and rivers that are routinely crossed by ATVs and other vehicles, which disturb the stream, riverbed, and other components of the watercourse. I recognize that there are competing interests at play, but what can we do to help stop this sort of thing from occurring, thereby helping the health of the fish habitat? I'm not going to take this one because we don't really get that. But in case you guys didn't notice, Parks Canada charged recently some people that were on a little adventure in the Banff backcountry and unfortunately put it on social media. And I know it was wilderness, but like it really was only 2 kilometers from a Forest Service road.
If you see bad stuff happening and you think it's bad, call us. Go to the website, find out who's the biologist in your area. Let us put a pin on it. Let us say, oh, we didn't know about that one. Oftentimes, you'll hear us say, you know, we know about that one. It's number 26 on our list and we're at 13 right now. But thank you very much. We'll move that up in the list. Be our eyes and ears out on the ground. You know, I travel a hell of a lot through Alberta, but I can't say the whole darn thing. And our biologists are out a lot, but we can't be everywhere. So absolutely be part of the team. Give us a call, take some pictures, show us where it is. You'll really find out, you'll find out, yeah, we got that one on the list. We're working on it. You can expect to be get a call when we start to do the collaborative projects with the Trout Unlimited, where we're going to fix that up. So yeah, if you want to find out who your local biologist is, I think it's in the fishing regs. I think you can just type in AEP biologist map and probably find where you are and who's the person. We'd love to hear from you. Join the team.
That sounded like a very comprehensive answer. So I think we can probably go on to another question. Chelsea's got a few. This has probably been inspired by Elliot. Any specific events in the Bow Basin for river snorkeling and or dive cleanups? I believe Trout Unlimited Canada does a river snorkeling volunteer event.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I know that there's like at least one dive group. I think there's several, and I think some of the people watching this right now are part of some of those groups, and I do think that they do cleanups as well. So that's on the diving side, and then on the snorkeling side, I know that we have in the past done some snorkel surveys where I believe we included volunteers. I think at Bill Griffiths Creek in Canmore. Yeah, I can't think of any like immediate plans to do that, but I saw also there was another question about citizen science. And really, like, if you are interested in that sort of thing, then Trout Unlimited Canada, we do have chapters in Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, and Red Deer. And so you should definitely consider joining a local chapter. And if that's the kind of initiative that you would like to lead or participate in, then yeah, the world is your oyster. So yeah, please get in touch. And even if you are just out and about and you see something that you think is important, like fish spawning somewhere, it's a little more complicated, but you can actually submit, it's called a random observation load form. And it's basically a form that you can submit to fisheries management. And that just makes sure that that information is included in the Fish and Wildlife database. And that will help future managers make better decisions about things that are happening that they just can't see everything all the time everywhere. So yeah, if you're interested in doing that, then you can certainly reach out to me or someone at your local Fish and Wildlife office, I'm sure would be willing to help you out as well.
Thanks, Elliot. I'm also trying to keep an eye on the chat a little bit. So if you're not watching chat, Leslie, Trout Unlimited, has added some info related to Dawn's question related to inspections and ATV crossings. There's this app. So I think that there's a couple of links about that. And, you know, I work for Parks Canada, but one of the things I've been working on lately with our local ENGO groups is trying to work on a cabin model for the East Slopes, which is a water quality model. And I am really impressed with the scope of the work that a lot of our ENGO groups do. And a lot of them are quite involved in restorations and helping coordinate build days for bridges and documenting and working with some of the OHV clubs. So I think that there are definitely some outlets for that stuff as well. So Dawn, it might be worth looking into who some of those local watershed groups are in your favorite area. This question is for me and I can't handle it very well. This is Chelsea's next question, and it's about the Banff tropical invasive species. So I'm not dodging it. I didn't tell you that I'm actually only responsible for Banff up to Castle Junction. And so the part of Banff that is in the Front Ranges and includes the town of Banff and includes the fish that were introduced into the hot spring water is not in my work unit. So I think what I need you to do is email me this question offline so I can put you in touch with the right guys in the Banff Field Unit so you can get an update on that. You are absolutely true. Some tropical fish were put into the wetland area, and we're pretty sure that they did extinguish a dace that was there. And I'm not actually sure if we consider that location kind of neutral now because the damage has been done, or whether the guys in Banff are actively planning anything there. But if you get in touch with me, Chelsea, I'll help you get that sorted out. Sherry had a question about the last update. When did the last update happen for whirling disease? As it was a department in the Alberta Environment was sending many questions on how to save salmonid fish, especially our species in our rivers. What did they offer to the local knowledge for this protection? I'm not sure. I definitely don't have an update on what's going on with whirling disease provincially. I'll just give you a second to talk about it nationally. In the mountain parks, we definitely have gone back to the locations that we did the original 2016 sampling in and are continuing to monitor it. So we haven't been talking to people necessarily about what we've been doing, but we've been working on it. We have detected no new detections. And we also, anytime people come with complaints or send me pictures of sick looking little twisted backfish, we definitely go out and take a sample and make sure that it isn't related to whirling disease. In the last 2 years, I think we've sampled 4 locations, and they do indeed look like they're infected by whirling disease, but it is not whirling disease. So there are some things going on there. And then most recently in the mountain parks, a lot of this whirling disease testing is very, it's lethal. We have to kill fish to do it. And that is one of the most accurate ways to figure out if you've got it. So last year in Kootenay only, because we don't believe we have it in British Columbia, we tried to implement a pilot of the work that was done by AEP in the Crow's Nest, where we created cages in the river that had sentinel fish that we basically put out there as canaries in the coal mine to sacrifice to see if we could infect them with whirling disease. We're happy to report that we still don't think we have it in the Kootenay, but we're going to be doing a little bit more work, I think, on that this year, trying to compare different methods in locations where we know that we have it, so we can look at like attack rates and things similar to the things that were done in the Crow's Nest Pass, but we're going to try to marry it with a little bit more environmental DNA monitoring and see if we can figure out a less invasive way to get at the same answer. So that's what Parks Canada has been doing. And we have not talked to the public about Johnson, but I think we got all the fish out of Johnson Lake. They're waiting for some eDNA results. So we're hopeful that has been successful. And one of the small ponds that I treated with rotenone closer to Lake Louise was treated because the fish did have whirling disease. And we think that we removed all of the fish. So we are following up with some eDNA monitoring for fish presence in that location, but we're hopeful that we got them all with one treatment and that we've stopped that cycle at that location. And that one was strategic for us because it was very close to the Alberta-British Columbia border. And we don't think we've got it in British Columbia yet, and we know that birds can move it. So we went after that one fairly quickly. And maybe somebody with Alberta can speak a little bit more to what's happening with whirling disease in the province.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, Shelley. For controlling whirling disease, the strategy we're taking, because it's so many places, is to make the fish populations healthy. The whirling disease seems to be an infection that gets into fish where it's not too hot or not too cold, it's just in a band, and where we have uniform genetics. If we have hatchery fish, or we're all down to one type of fish, the whirling disease can go through there like a forest fire. But if we have a diversity of stocks, meaning this little creek is a little different from that little creek, what we've learned from our colleagues in the States is diversity gives you resilience. Some fish will get it, but some won't. Our strategy for fighting whirling disease is biodiversity. Can we maintain our native stocks and native biodiversity and native range, this glorious diversity of fish? That is our best strategy. The monitoring for whirling disease has gone down with the funding declines, but our knowledge has gone up. We just increased. We just published a paper, came out last week in Canadian Journal of Fisheries and Aquatic Science. We're using that detailed scientific knowledge in our individual GEO models, our individual cumulative effects for individual watersheds as to how we can fight whirling disease, not by getting rid of the little jellyfish, or sometimes by getting rid of the fish like Shelley did, but more keeping the ecosystem healthy, keeping the mud away, the silt away, which makes the worms grow, which makes the little baby jellyfish grow and get into the fish. A healthy ecosystem doesn't have whirling disease. Let's get our ecosystems healthy. That's our goal. That's our strategy. That's our tactic.
There's a couple items on the chat, so people might want to just try to follow that along if they can, or take a quick look at that. Some people have asked about what some of these other diseases were. Elliot pointed out that there's quite a few diseases that can cause the spinal deformations. The ones that we sent in were all from British Columbia, so we sent them to the fish health lab in Duncan, BC, and she analyzed them for sort of the typical parasites, viruses, and bacteria and things that can cause it. At one location, we think it might have had to do with a DO sag, a dissolved oxygen sag, but we don't know for sure what's caused it. So far, the locations that we've been dealing with have been brook trout. It doesn't seem to be like harming the overall population, but you can definitely see some fish that don't look very good in there. I'm going to go on to Alvin First Rider's question. How can we expand the citizen science aspect to get a holistic perspective? A lot of studies only provide snapshots to species presence, and citizen science can help fill gaps in data collection, education, and awareness. Who would like to tackle this one? I have a quick thought. That if you check in the chat, they're definitely, and I know Alvin, you already know some of these groups. We have some very well organized ENGO groups that do high quality citizen science as part of their regular programming. So I think working with those groups is an option that already exists if the relationships are there. So that is one of them for sure.
Yeah, I know, like provincially, like even just with the Native Trout Collaborative, there's a couple of data sources, I guess, in particular that are of interest. One of them that just comes to mind is watercourse crossings, and there's been a new app developed that anyone can use to inventory and document watercourse crossings. That's things like culverts and fords and things like that, basically places where streams and trails cross water bodies. So that's a good one to start with. And then there's, yeah, like Shelley mentioned, more groups than I can probably mention here in one sentence. But yeah, I think if you're interested, then definitely reach out to any of us on the call, and we would be happy to either steer you to one of our own initiatives or help connect you with someone else.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and add a few as well. One that I like that's more kind of like observational focused that I learned about when I was in school is on the LEO network, and it's called the Northern Climate Observer. And it's really cool because it's spatially done as well, so you can put observations. So you don't necessarily have to be a scientist. Anybody can say, like, you know, the willows are budding, you know, is what you'll see, right? And you see that's happening like in northern Alberta in January, and it's like, whoa, that's like a powerful observation. And what they do with all that data is they start to establish some trends, and then they can explore where they're seeing variation and where they're seeing unusual observations. So that's one. Cows and Fish, we have a riparian health app that you can download on your phone, and you can do health assessments. We are working on a collaborative project with the Mistaki Institute with beavers, and so it'll be using the Zooniverse platform, which is really cool too. If you've not used Zooniverse before, you can, another place where you can kind of sign up to be a citizen science. But the app that, or the citizen science aspect that we're looking at for beaver is using satellite imagery for people to identify beaver dams. Because we're really interested in finding out just how many beaver are left out on the landscape, how many of the dams are active or old. Still not sure on the name yet of that. Noreen, you might be able to help with this one. I vote for beavers from space, but we'll see. So stay tuned for that one. And then, yeah, check in with the local watershed group. They are always doing amazing work, and there's always opportunity for volunteering.
Yeah, this is Mike Sullivan. I'll just add to that, Amy. We tend to use folks like Trout Unlimited as a force multiplier, that there's an organization already for our citizen science to get, I just saw in the chat, Ken Monk from Trout Unlimited Edmonton Northern Lights chapter. Amazing group of scientists, citizen scientists that are working with us and doing some phenomenal work. So that seems to be where we get our best bang for the buck. An already organized group that can do the training, that can be part of a very specific project, rather than sort of what we call broad scale fairy dust of all sorts of citizen science giving little bits of stuff. We're focusing it using a few groups and some really, really skookum science coming out of that. So get in touch with some of the local groups and see what citizen science projects they're involved in. And just another big shout out to Ken Monk and the rest of the Northern Light Fly Tyers. Awesome piece of citizen science. And Ken brought up, when I said bull trout need hugs, he said, make sure it's a wet hug. Keep them wet. Don't dog them out of the water. I meant it in a figurative, not a literal sense. Thanks, Ken.
Flora also added a comment related to this, just reminding people about the Elbow River Watershed Partnership because they're really active and they do host restoration events. Their focus areas in the McLean Creek Public Land Use Zone and the West Bragg Creek Day Use area this year, and they've got a website. So if people are looking for an outlet for their energy and wanting to be involved in participating in citizen science, this is a great spot to do it. Our questions have slowed down, so we don't seem to have any new questions that are coming in. It is 9 o'clock. It has been half an hour. But if anybody has anything else that they want to join in on or add in, I'm happy to entertain them. We've got a great lineup. So we still seem to have about 73 people hanging on, which is amazing. We've got a couple more evening sessions in the weeks to come. And then we are going to have a daytime session that's going to be a little bit more technical. So please make sure that you guys join us if you have the chance to do that. And certainly, I get a lot of email from people. My email is out there, and there's definitely a few people that don't hesitate to send me questions. I'd like it better when it's not like super angry right as soon as I open it. But I don't think you should be like intimidated. We try to get to them when we can, and we certainly I have a group of anglers or super active park users who are super passionate, who don't hesitate to send me questions about stuff that they hear that maybe we're doing or we really are doing or not doing. And it's a nice chance to connect with people. And like Mike said, I don't think a lot of people realize the power of their question or their time. And sometimes people have got some good insights that we maybe weren't even aware of. So we appreciate that. Does anybody have anything else? All right, we're starting to get some thank yous. I think, Doreen, I think we can probably wrap up our evening. So again, it's been recorded. If you've logged in and registered,